threatens to destroy the Patriot cause.
The British command in Boston got word that the Massachusetts militia was gathering weapons outside the city in the western suburbs of Lexington and Concord. So British soldiers began marching out where they heard the weapons were being stockpiled.
Warren learns not only that hundreds of redcoats are headed for Concord to seize the arms, but also to find and capture Patriot leaders Sam Adams and John Hancock, who are hiding in Lexington.
The atrocities have grown and grown. If we do not act now, we are slaves forever. We have to act.
Warren needs the Patriot militias outside Boston to be ready to face down the British, which could finally trigger a war. But sending out the alarm is risky, given that the British Army has sealed off Boston. So he deploys his secret network of messengers.
Warren decides to just send a couple of men on horseback so he can be sure that the message gets through and the militia is raised to defend those two towns.
Among Warren's messengers are William Dawes and Paul Revere. The riders travel in opposite directions to increase their chances of reaching both Lexington, then Concord. Revere crosses the Charles River, where he begins his historic ride. Dawes takes the southern land route on his way to Lexington. But as they spread the word of the Redcoats' advance, Revere and Dawes will be joined by a third rider, a man who didn't set out that night to become a hero of the Revolution, Dr. Samuel Prescott. He's in Lexington visiting his fiancée, Lydia.
So Concord, and more importantly, the fate of the entire revolution is suddenly in the hands of this young, 24-year-old doctor that's just out on a hot date.
At 1 o'clock that morning, Prescott bids Lydia a good night. As he rides home to Concord, fate sees to it that he runs into Revere and Dawes, who have already delivered their message to Lexington.
He's from Concord, he's a part of the militia, and so he thinks, oh, we'll be able to spread the word a lot faster if I'm with you because everyone knows me. It's my home. So he joins the trio and then they take off.
But within minutes, they gallop straight into trouble.
Paul Revere's a little bit ahead, and he sees two men and realizes that they're British sentries. And then as he tries to alert his friends, the two men become four men, and then all of a sudden they're circled.
Revere is captured. Dawes and Prescott break free. But Dawes is thrown from his horse, forcing him to limp home. The only rider to make it to Concord to deliver the message about the British advance is Samuel Prescott.
The regulars are out! Come on!
Alerted to the British advance, the colonists grab their guns and prepare for their first direct confrontation. Meanwhile, Patriot leaders John Hancock and Sam Adams make their escape.
If the British had gotten to Lexington without any advance warning, they could have captured a couple of key members of Congress, Samuel Adams and John Hancock. And if they had gotten to Concord, they would have been able to capture the ammunition and powder that the Americans so desperately needed.
In the pre-dawn hours of April 19, 1775, dozens of colonial militia stand ready to face down the Redcoats. Before this day is over, America's struggle for liberty will explode into history's most influential war for independence. 700 British troops are advancing towards Concord, Massachusetts, to seize a colonial store of arms and to arrest leaders of the growing independence movement. Their route takes them through the town of Menotomy and past the home of a retired 78-year-old soldier, Samuel Whitmore. Twice married and the father of 8, Whitmore served for 5 decades as a soldier in the King's Army, fighting in several colonial wars. His French saber is a relic of his 40 years of service.
People would ask Whitmore, how did you get this French saber? He would respond by saying, the gentleman that had it died suddenly.
Now, like most Massachusetts colonists, Whitmore opposes Britain's heavy-handed tactics and growing military presence. But when he sees British regulars marching through town, he knows the Patriot militias are in trouble, largely because they're so unprepared for battle.
British leaders think the American soldiers are weak. This dates back to the French and Indian War, when the Americans would line up in the thick of battle, the Americans would turn and run.
The colonial soldiers are about to meet their first test. In a field outside Lexington, 77 militiamen have gathered to block the redcoat advance towards Concord. John Parker, leader of the Minutemen, knows the British outnumber his forces 10-1. He doesn't expect to defeat them. He just wants to send a message. We're here, we have guns, and we're going to resist. Major John Pitcairn, who commands the British troops, doesn't want to fight in Lexington. Running behind schedule, his goal is to secure a bridge farther west in Concord, but Pitcairn is forced to respond to the Minutemen's blockade.
Lay down your arms. Hold that fire!
Neither side wanted a war to start, and so they stand there sort of face to face for a while.
Hundreds of professional soldiers confront dozens of militiamen armed with squirrel rifles and buckshot. Both Parker and Pitcairn issue orders not to shoot.
And somebody fired. And to this day, nobody knows exactly who fired. Was it a British soldier? Was it an American soldier? Was it a bystander? Who knows?
The shot triggers a hail of British bullets. The militiamen are overwhelmed and quickly retreat, some racing into the nearby woods. In 15 minutes, the Redcoats have routed the colonists. When the smoke clears, 8 Patriots lay dead, and the British soldiers continue on their way to Concord. The Battle of Lexington seems to confirm the worst, that Americans have no appetite for battle. But when the Redcoats reach Concord, it's suddenly a very different story. 2,000 Minutemen from 40 different towns are waiting to confront 700 Army regulars, and this time it's the colonists who control the field. The British are forced to abandon their position. They first withdraw to the center of Concord, then begin a hasty retreat back to Boston. 1,600 Patriot militia fighters line their escape route and open fire.
The Americans fought dirty. They hid in houses, they hid in trees, they hid behind walls, and they were also circling around the British column the entire way from Concord back to Boston.
As the Redcoats break ranks and race for safety in Boston, they once again pass Samuel Whitmore's farm. Whitmore has the heart of a warrior, and while it served the British well when he fought for them against the French, he now turns that spirit against the Empire and towards the cause of revolution.
Whitmore waits until the British are right on top of him. Then he whips out his dueling pistols and drops 2 more. The Redcoats come at him, and he grabs his old French saber and starts hacking at him. One of them shoots him at point-blank range. Then they bayonet him more than a dozen times. How dare this old man attack them?
The Redcoats leave Whitmore for dead.
Only he doesn't die. He recovers, and he lives to be well into his 90s before he actually finally passes away.
As the day comes to a close, 73 Redcoats are dead, 174 are wounded. The American body count is 49. America and Great Britain are now officially at war. And though Concord is not a decisive military victory, the military governor of Massachusetts, Thomas Gage, the man who sent the troops to Concord, gets a very clear message from the battles.
The lesson that Gage came away from is that we were a lot more determined and a lot more effective fighters than he thought we were.
When the fighting began, both sides had the misconception that both sides had to nearly every war. They thought it was going to be short. Kind of stumbled their way into it. And then they thought, okay, a couple of good victories, we win, we go on. That's not the way it turned out.
By the end of April 1775, 20,000 militia fighters from across New England surround Boston. The stage is now set for the bloodiest battle of the American Revolution. Enraged by the Patriots' aggression at Lexington and Concord, Britain vows to crush the rebellious Americans once and for all. Boston has become a city under siege. 9,000 British troops occupy the town, which is surrounded by 20,000 rebel militiamen stationed in nearby Roxbury and Cambridge. Both sides know a deadly battle will erupt any day.
It looks worse than it is. Sound doesn't pound.
Patriot firebrand Joseph Warren is now president of the Massachusetts Provincial Congress and Major General of the militia.
Dr. Warren, you, sir.
On June 16, 1775, word reaches Warren that 2,000 British soldiers are preparing to come ashore in Charlestown, near Bunker Hill, just north of Boston. That night, Warren orders 1,000 men up the hill to dig earthen fortifications. But instead of Bunker Hill, they build them on nearby Breed's Hill, which looks out over the harbor and the city.
Colonel Prescott, one of the commanders of the operation, claims that he got the order to set up on Breed's Hill. That put the American and British cannons within range of each other.
The artillery on Breed's Hill is a huge threat to the British. From Breed's Hill, they could easily bombard the ships from their position. This is really an act of aggression, and the British respond.
At dawn on June 17th, the British are astonished to see the extensive defenses the colonists built overnight. But it doesn't keep them from landing their forces, and by early afternoon, 3,000 British troops arrive in Charlestown and burn it to the ground. The Americans have orders to hold their fire until the Redcoats have closed to within 50 yards. The close-packed British troops fall in clumps. The Patriots drive them back at every point, forcing them down the hill to regroup. But the Americans' gunpowder is running out fast. Bunker Hill is the first full-scale battle of the Revolution, and the bloodiest. Among the colonial fighters is a little-known hero named Salem Poor.
Stand your ground!
A former New England slave who purchased his freedom in 1769 for 27 pounds. Now he fights to keep it.
Salem Corps' remarkable performance on the battlefield clearly demonstrated to the British that even men who were born into slavery understood that this was an opportunity to fight for liberty.
Hoare is married with an infant son, but he left his wife and child to rally with the Minutemen at Concord and to fight for the Patriot cause at Bunker Hill. Hoare is one of about 100 African Americans at this battle, and one of 5,000 who will take arms against Britain in the course of the war.
After the battle, he's commended by 14 officers to the Provincial Congress for the way that he fought with exceptional valor.
Leading the Patriot defense, Dr. now Major General Joseph Warren leaps into the teeth of battle.
Give him hell!
Right there on the front line saying, I am a private in the service of American rights is Dr. Joseph Warren.
So we need to build a group up there as much as here.
He famously said, speaking of the British, these fellows say we won't fight. And by heaven, I hope I shall die up to my knees in blood.
During the first two assaults on Breed's Hill, Warren helps hold the line, rallying the Patriots to stand their ground.
Reload! Reload!
But the British Army's third wave overwhelms them. Redcoats by the hundreds swarm across their defenses. Many Patriots scatter when their gunpowder runs out. At that dark moment, the young revolution takes its mightiest blow yet. Legend has it that Dr. Warren's last words are, "It is sweet and fitting to die for your country." At the first great conflict of the revolution he launched, the 34-year-old patriot becomes a martyr for American independence. Warren is one of 115 Americans killed at Bunker Hill. The British victory has cost them 10 times as much. 1,054 soldiers, half their fighting force, have been killed or wounded.
This was a devastating blow for the British forces. It was a complete slaughter.
Two days after the battle, a wealthy Virginia planter, George Washington, becomes Commander-in-Chief of America's new Continental Army.
There was no possible way of turning back. And what the outcome of that was going to be really was unknown.
The only certainty is that freedom is never won without sacrifice. The stakes are now clear. Liberty or death.
Liberty or death. Who said that? Come on. Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death. Okay, what we want to do now is we want to continue with the lecture. We're going to talk about the Battle of Moores Creek Bridge. So get your notes out when you're ready for that. I think it's kind of important that you guys are able to see kind of what we're talking about a little bit. Obviously, you're not going to get authentic footage of this type of thing. And so it's always important to let you at least see through a little bit of drama what happened there. So we started talking about this a little bit yesterday, the Battle of Moores Creek Bridge. And we'll continue today to kind of explain this and then get into some issues on independence. As we mentioned yesterday, the Battle of Moores Creek Bridge was really the first battle fought toward the south. It was fought in North Carolina, And it's more often referred to as the Lexington and Concord of the South than it is the Battle of Moores Creek Bridge. And the battle was set up because the governor of North Carolina was a loyalist, very loyal to Great Britain, and he wanted to ensure that the entire colony of North Carolina stayed loyal as well. And that's pretty difficult. So what he does is he recruits about 2,000 loyalists from the colony, and he's going to try to force these non-loyalists to go about his way of thinking with these 2,000 loyalists that he has recruited. And what they're going to do is they're going to march to first Wilmington and then to Brunswick, North Carolina, where they're going to be joined by British soldiers and a powerful British fleet. So the governor of North Carolina wants to ensure that the entire colony stays loyalist. He knows he has some people that live in the colony that are not, and so he recruits 2,000 loyalists from the colony. They're going to march to Wilmington and then to Brunswick, where they will be joined by British soldiers and a powerful British fleet, and their job is going to be to convince these non-loyalists that they need to stay loyal. Now, because of Joseph Warren's spy network that he established prior to his death, the Patriots are fully aware of what's going on here. They're prepared for these 2,000 loyalists, and they know they're going to be joined by British soldiers and a powerful British fleet. And the man that's leading the Patriots in this endeavor is a fellow by the name of James Moore. And he has approximately 1,100 Patriots, which he has stationed at Moores Creek Bridge, waiting for these loyalists to get there. Okay? So, James Moore has stationed approximately 1,100